previous session, hopefully you've been able to take the time to go and have a look at the discussion points that were there. With me today I have Kira. So Kira has been helping me out in terms of pulling together guidelines for the funeral directors and for at-need and pre-need. So therefore I've asked her to join because I don't want to just talk about her work. So we will try and take questions, but as any that were on last time will know, sorry, I'm just seeing somebody saying they've got no sound. Previously, you'll know that the questions last time became a bit of a messy. So what we will try and do is just see if we can catch them as we go. And if not, we will get them printed at the end of the webinar again, and we will send them out to you this time. The FAQs weren't sent out previously. That was just to allow us to do this follow-up webinar and give you a bit more content around that. So what we're going to cover today is data security in a bit more detail, because since the last webinar we've got more information for you. Contacting customers, contracts with third parties, so by contracts we mean data processing contracts, and then we're going to run through the questions and answers from the previous webinar. Now, we've split those into different areas and we won't be able to get through them all because there was about 50 questions. So we've split them up into, as you can see, various categories, and we will then share those with you at the end as well. So I'm just going to pass you over to Kira, who's going to speak to you about data security. So here's yours.
Okay, so a kind of starting point for data security is, what do we really mean by data in the context of the GDPR? So really we mean any information that can directly or indirectly identify a natural person. So it might be, but it's not limited to name, address, date of birth, things like that. There's also special categories of data, such as race and religion, which have special rules attributed to them. And it's worth noting that it only relates to a living individual to be protected under the GDPR. So anything you do in relation to customers for prepaid funeral planning, or any data for the next of kin or family for your at-need work, the data of anyone that's passed away isn't covered by the GDPR, but you just need to bear in mind you'll generally have the next of kin details included within that as well. So in terms of storage of the data, your business has an obligation to make sure that it's held securely. So basically we mean you want to have sufficient controls in place to make sure that it can't be accessed by somebody who doesn't have the authority to access it. It's not accessed by someone who doesn't really need to access it, or you don't accidentally lose it, damage it, or destroy it. Generally, we suggest that electronic data is more secure. We know from the funeral directors we've spoken to that you tend to prefer to keep things on paper, but our position is really that paper is easily lost or destroyed. It's much harder to do that with electronic data, and even if you do it by accident, it's much easier to recover than trying to piece together a shredded bit of paper. If you do need to keep copies or hard copies of data, you know, paper application forms, things like that, you want to make sure they're kept securely, so locked drawer kind of thing. Make sure that it can only be accessed by people that actually need to access it. Now, in terms of retention of data, the GDPR basically says you should only keep it for as long as strictly necessary to achieve the purpose, which isn't really very helpful and means that you have to work out what that means for your business. Under the GDPR, you will need to create a document retention policy, and we've created some guidance to help you do that if you've not already got one. But a document retention policy will basically say, here's the types of data and here's how long we're going to keep them for. And it just means that regardless of who in the business picks it up, you'll all be doing the same thing. When you're deciding the retention policies, think about how long the customer would reasonably expect you to hold the data for. And you should also think about whether you actually need to store it or whether you're just doing it because that's what we've always done, which I know is certainly the case in here sometimes. Having said that, there are some things that you shouldn't be keeping, so like payment details. Once you've submitted the application forms into ourselves and we've sent you the allocations pack out, you should be redacting all the payment information, and that's just a legal requirement really. And then kind of the last bit on data security is in terms of destroying data. So again, you should destroy it once you no longer have a need to keep it. That might be because the timescale that you've set yourselves in your document retention policy is elapsed, or it might be because the customer has exercised their right to be forgotten and said they don't want you to hold their data anymore. When you're destroying the data, you want to make sure it's done kind of securely and confidentially. And again, that's just to keep yourselves right in case it's been challenged. In the office, we have a third-party company that does all our waste management, but we recognise that's probably not applicable to a lot of your businesses. And generally, a shredder in the office before recycling the information is probably acceptable in terms of that. And yeah, you just want to make sure that you're keeping good records of your document retention as well. And again, that's just to keep yourselves right in case it was challenged. So we'll give you a template certificate of destruction as part of the awareness documents we'll give you. And we want to make sure that you're just filling that in and storing it with all your company documents just to make sure you're keeping yourself right. Okay. Now, in terms of contacting customers, we're going to look at kind of 3 broad areas: capturing the consent, managing the consent, and when do you need consent to contact the customers. Generally, the GDPR has made it more difficult to obtain consent, and there's a number of criteria that you should really be fulfilling to make sure your consent's valid. We'll give you guidance on how to get it, what that means, but briefly we're kind of going to go through the headlines for what it means for your business just now. So under the GDPR, you need to make sure that consent is for a clear and specific purpose, so the customer understands what it is that they're consenting to. So that means that if you're planning on passing their data to a third party, like the crematorium or the celebrant, you also need to make them aware of that at the time that you capture the consent. For the purposes of the webinar, we're going to look at consent in terms of marketing consent, because that's the largest area you're going to be affected by. In terms of capturing the consent, you want to make sure that it's a positive action for the customer. So we've spoken to a few funeral directors who used to, as a matter of course, just opt all of their customers out of marketing. That's not something they're going to be able to do anymore. You need to let each customer make the choice for themselves. And the GDPR also means that you need to have granular consent, which basically means that you need to have a different consent for each method of contact. So phone, text, post, everything like that, you'll need a separate consent. Though we will be able to give you a template to do that, and generally a tick box for each would be sufficient. Okay. So yeah, we will give you a template for consent, and that'll be available with all of the awareness documents that we'll send out to you. Now, in terms of managing consent, similar to the document retention and the data, you want to make sure you're keeping accurate records. And again, that's just to keep your own business right. Consent can be given a number of ways. You know, it can be a verbal conversation, it can come in on a written inquiry, you know, a coupon that's come in, or it can be an online inquiry. So you want to make sure that when you're capturing the consent and your ongoing management, you want to make sure you've got good records of how it was kept. Most of you'll have, you know, your funeral business, that's why you're having a chat with us today. But you'll also have side businesses occasionally, such as stonemasons or bereavement services. If that's the case, you need to make sure you've got separate consent for that as well. So again, it's important that you keep the records accurate so you can evidence if the customer did come back and say, well, I didn't consent to that, you can prove one way or the other. And the last thing in terms of managing the consent is how long would the customer reasonably expect you to keep that consent for? And again, there's no set answer. It's something that you need to determine for your own something that you need to determine for your own business insofar as how long you expect reasonable for your customers. So Golden Charter will be able to give you some guidance, but at the end of the day, it's your business, so you need to make the decision as to how long is reasonable for you. But as an example, we've determined that 2 years is an appropriate timescale for retaining consent for marketing purposes. So that might give you a bit of guidance as far as what might be reasonable for you. And the last question, and I suppose the most appropriate for you, is when do you need consent to contact your customers? So we referred this question to the DMA, which is the Direct Marketing Authority, and their position was pretty much that if you're contacting an individual customer, you should always need consent. this isn't necessarily the approach that Golden Charter is going to take, and as a business you need to decide how risky it is for you to contact them without explicit consent. So that's up to you as a business to determine what's reasonable for you. So for example, you might decide to continue to contact people that have previously inquired with you about your services to advise them of price rises, because there's a legitimate interest or a reasonable expectation from them that you would contact them about that. However, other things such as refer a friend schemes, where people might ask you to contact another individual on their behalf, we wouldn't suggest that you generally follow in the current process. Instead, you might want to give your existing customers a leaflet with their details and your details, get their friend to fill it in and send it back to you, which would then mean you've got the consent of that individual to contact them. We know that generally a lot of the funeral directors do leaflet drops, things like that. These are fine because they're targeting a group of people rather than specific individuals. So things like radio adverts in the local papers, all still fine to do because it's not targeting a specific individual. However, we did ask the DMA about things like feedback questionnaires, Christmas cards, things that you do for your families, and it was their position that that shouldn't still be happening because they're still likely to be indirect marketing. So if you're writing to them, it'll be on your letterhead, it'll have your logos. So whilst it's not direct marketing, their position was you're still promoting your business, you shouldn't be doing it. Again though, it's your business, you need to decide what's reasonable for you. So you need to decide what level of risk your business wants to accept. So I'll pass you back to Louise to talk about third-party contracts.
Thank you. Michael, we have seen your question, but we're going to answer that later on, so we're not ignoring that, promise. So contracts with third parties, we do have some good news. Kira actually went out to the Direct Marketing Association for some guidance on how a funeral director is supposed to manage contracts with the likes of celebrants, crematoria, ministers. So their definition is that you don't. And the way that they're going with that is because the processing isn't an ongoing process of data. It's a one-off contract that you have with the customer and it is being used to fulfill that contract. As long as the customer is aware that they will have their details passed to the crematorium or the celebrant, which they will, they wouldn't expect you to have a data processing agreement with those individuals. So that is quite good news because we were beginning to worry that funeral directors would struggle to get data processing agreements with those individuals. I will send out word for word what the Direct Marketing Association told us, and actually we've been told that a couple of times by them, but maybe me, I didn't believe they understood what we were truly asking them, so went back to them time and time again to make sure, and it was the DMA solicitor that came back to us. So anybody that was panicking about contracts with individual celebrants for every single funeral that you conduct, you shouldn't have to worry about that going forward. You will, however, need contracts with any third-party suppliers you use for the likes of your IT hardware, or anybody that stores data for you. I don't know if you use the likes of Sky Vault it's like a cloud-based system where you can scan records and they hold records for you. Anybody that is processing data for you on a daily basis, on an ongoing basis, you do need to have contracts in place with them. I've jumped down, unfortunately. So why do you need a contract in place? So all data controllers who are using data processors to process data on their behalf need a contract in place to outline the responsibilities between the two parties. We did touch on this in the previous webinar, and it is down to the responsibilities of the data processors being enhanced now. Previously, data controllers would be held for anything that's happened that they believe was caused by them, but processors now have just as much responsibility, and those contracts are there to protect both parties. So as we suggested previously, there will be a contract in place between Golden Charter and the funeral directors. It's not the 4-page document that we originally had that came with lots of legal speak on it. We have simplified it down. The reason for that is we believe that it is a low risk that the funeral directors would handle data poorly, deliberately. So that will be coming out to you, and it will also serve as a template for the funeral director to use with any of their third parties that process on their behalf. So how do I manage contracts with third parties? So if you're taking on a new third party to process data on your behalf, you should be conducting due diligence checks on them. Again, we will provide a one-page document for you guys to use to conduct that due diligence. Again, now we've had some due diligence documents in from third parties that we plan to work with, and they've been 15 pages long. Now, 15 pages long is only beneficial if you have a huge business with policies coming out your ears that is a really high risk to the business. We don't deem this to be high risk. So we have slimmed it down to one section, which we believe the funeral directors will be able to read through and understand, and allow you to understand who you're conducting business with. Yeah, you will need a contract with anybody that you've got a software program with, if that software program is holding your data at a third party server. If you've got the software on your computer and it's a buy off the shelf and the third party doesn't have any interaction with it at all, you won't. Only where you're transferring backwards and forwards. So for instance, Golden Charter use SharePoint. We use Microsoft servers to host as backups for our data. Therefore, we need to make sure our contract with Microsoft is watertight, which it is, because obviously from a DPA point of view, we'd have always looked at that previously. What about our call answering service who take details from clients? I didn't even know this existed. So call answering service, if they are taking details from customers to get you to call them back, I'm assuming. Yep, stage one. Yeah, so back to the call answering, sorry, I go off on a tangent. If somebody is taking details on your behalf, you are the data controller and you're telling them what to do with the data, therefore you would have an agreement with that party. Like I said, we will send a really straightforward template out for you to use. Will it fit every single business? Probably not. So we'll send out the really basic one, but also the really hefty one. You can look and see what it is exactly that you need to use. So hopefully for contracts, we're just about there. I was beginning to panic, like I said, that we were going to need for every single celebrant in the country, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And like I said, I will provide you guys with the wording so that you can keep a note of that in any process documents that you hold. So sorry. We're over the general GDPR, so now we're just going to go over the Q&A that we went over previously. I'm not going to answer all the questions. I am going to be looking down a lot because I've got all the questions written next to me. So I'm just going to start running through some of these. Some of this, some of you will know already and you've heard me speaking about, but it's just us putting it down clearer for anybody that maybe didn't grasp it previously. So what is the difference between a data controller and a data processor? So the ICO's definition of a controller and a processor is a controller determines the purpose and the means of processing personal data. For funeral plans, prepaid funeral plans, that would be Golden Charter. A processor is responsible for processing the personal data on behalf of the controller and at the instruction of the controller. So in prepaid funeral plan terms, that might be a funeral director or an intermediary, any third party that's selling funeral plans on our behalf. If you're a processor, the GDPR places specific legal obligations on you. So I've alluded to that a couple of times now. Previously, data processors had very, very limited responsibility, and now you have just as much responsibility as the controller if the data controller has provided you the sufficient instructions on how you handle that data. For instance, if Golden Charter turned around and said, oh, we're not going to give you any instruction, do what you like, and then the ICO walked into your office, you wouldn't be held accountable for that. Golden Charter would be held accountable for that. However, we will provide you with guidance on how to handle prepaid funeral plans. If you choose to do something different with that, you will be held liable for that, and it won't be Golden Charter if we've provided you enough training and documents and various things. So what does it cost to register with the ICO? So it costs £35 unless you have over 250 members of staff or a turnover of £25.9 million, which I'm sure we'd all like to be in that position. I'm sure it's a very, very small community of funeral directors. So it's a £30 annual fee and you have to register every year. Registration takes no more than 20 minutes. And you can go on and do a self-assessment to find out if you should register. Now, I ran through the ICO self-registration assessment and I pretended that I was a funeral director. So if I was a funeral director, what information would I be holding? And what would I be doing with it? And it did come out on every occasion that we should be ICO registered. Again, a simple way to figure that out is if you've got CCTV that looks out onto a public space, you should be ICO registered. But the fact that you're holding vast amounts of data does mean that you should be registered. It doesn't really mean much in terms of what they will do with that information. It will be publicly available and it'll be on their website and on the register, but it just lets them know what exactly you're doing with data. So in your case, you're storing it, you're processing it, you're deleting it. It's very vague, very tick boxy, but if you are found to not be ICO registered and you should be ICO registered, you will be fined and they will display your name on their website. So previously I was asked who's going to police GDPR, and there is just no way the ICO are going to manage to police this as one. They are going to highly depend on the public doing that on their behalf, the same way they've done with nuisance calls for a lot of years. And what we see is that nuisance calls are being eradicated. They're still a bit of a pain, but they're really taking a hard stance on managing that and handing out fines. We recently seen that the ICO fined a couple £1,000, quite a large company. I can't remember for the life of me who it was. Yeah. So Scottish and Southern Energy sent one incorrect email. They were fined £1,000. And the reason they got that £1,000 fine was because their own processes hadn't been followed. The £1,000 to a company that size means absolutely nothing. The reputational damage is different. And when I'm thinking about a funeral director point of view, obviously nobody wants to be fined and lose money, but I always see that your heart is with the funeral, the families, and it's about the reputational damage, and reputational damage of losing data or destroying data incorrectly and then having to go back to the family, that never stays with that one family. Everybody finds out about it. So for me, it's about protecting you and your families and your reputation in the community. So when does GDPR come into force? The 25th of May 2018. So it's fast approaching. I think I heard somebody in the office say it's 99 days because unfortunately we do have a countdown clock on our intranet page because that's how fun we are at Golden Charter. And does GDPR only affect registered companies? No, it affects everybody that stores or handles customer data. So moving on to funeral director as the data controller. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out who's doing what slide. After a customer has passed away and funeral is complete, can the funeral director contact the family to invite them to a bereavement service? So as Kira alluded to, the answer to that question is yes, if you have consent for contacting the family. I recently sat in on an at-need funeral arrangement, and the company that I was in didn't think that there was really a way to capture consent during an at-need funeral arrangement, and I completely agreed with them. I thought it'd be quite insensitive. I didn't think the family would like it. However, when they were going through the forms, it turns out they already were, because the crematoria form had a marketing question on it, and that question was along the lines of, crematorium would like to contact you to offer you a memorial service or bereavement day and open day. Would you be interested in hearing from them? And the family didn't even look surprised. I think it's become so part of day to day. And the issue lies with us as individuals and how comfortable we are asking the question. The family said no, that crematorium cannot contact the family. However, if the funeral director had asked, who the family are sitting in front of, they've got a connection with, they've got a relationship with, I feel that the answer may have been different. Don't know, because it never got asked, but there is definitely an opportunity there if you position it correctly. And I know our marketing team are going to work on pulling together guidance on the best way to do that. Obviously, to you guys that are with the families, we will never say you must do this. We will always encourage you to do it. But it is just about positioning and be comfortable and use individuals and what you're willing to push yourself to. But like I said, have a look at your crematoria forms, because you might surprise yourself that you're already doing it. If funeral directors forward donations on behalf of a client to a charity, can't we give the charity the name and address of the person who's requested this, thereby confirming the donation of the receipts? So that would go under what we were speaking about earlier with contracts. That individual will be expecting to hear from the charity. You don't need a contract with the charity. And it's again fulfilling a contract between you and the customer that they wanted you to take donations for them. Can funeral directors pass customer data to potentially non-compliant third parties where the customer says this is okay, i.e. the individual celebrant? How would the funeral director know if they are compliant? And this is a tough one, because it is the customer's request. Now, if you know that the celebrant has a really bad reputation for binning his data in the bin in the town, you maybe don't want to be passing the data off. You maybe want to really limit the data. You maybe want to think about a different way of contacting that celebrant. So contacting the celebrant on the family's behalf, giving minimal information, but giving the celebrant's details to the family to contact. Again, these are planning funerals for bereaved families. That might not be the best way of working. And I'm pretty sure we don't have any celebrants that are throwing customer data about the town or wallpapering their walls with it. However, if you know that somebody has a poor reputation for it, you maybe want to suggest somebody different, or just think of a different ways and means of getting that data over, that it's not you that's handing over the data, or just very, very minimum. So what we've got here is, would it be the celebrant's responsibility to delete the client's information, or would it be the responsibility of the funeral director? So it's definitely the celebrant's responsibility to delete it. It's the funeral director's responsibility to tell the celebrant that you expect them to delete the data. That's a given. Again, I don't think there's going to be many that are sitting with stacks and stacks of data, but like I said, I have been in a funeral directors recently and I've seen lots and lots of paperwork. I've never having met a celebrant personally, I wouldn't know what their filing system's like. So it is worthwhile just making sure that once everything's concluded, you send an email over or a quick phone call just to say, thanks for doing that for us. Can you just remember and get rid of that data, or at least take off any next of kin details that you don't need. So what we've got here is, if a client signs a contract stating that funeral directors can keep records archived for reference purposes, would this be acceptable and justifying record keeping? So if the customer signed that they are happy for the funeral director to keep the records indefinitely and for reference purposes, this would be deemed as consent to do so. However, that doesn't mean the ICO wouldn't come back and challenge it, because I certainly would. I'd be saying, well, what do you need to keep the next of kin details for? Having visited a funeral director, I now understand why you keep your records for so long. And as Kira alluded to earlier, GDPR only applies to living individuals. Therefore, it's only the next of kin details or family details that are an issue on the application forms or any of your paperwork that you're using for at-need funerals. Therefore, we would recommend, and for prepaid funerals, the instruction will be is you can keep the paperwork, but you need to redact all next of kin details and payment card details. There's just no real reason to keep a next of kin detail. So if somebody's planned a funeral and they're 20 years old at the time they've unfortunately had to plan a funeral, they probably don't expect you still to have their details when they're 60. Definitely they would expect you to have details on the funeral, but not their own personal details. And can funeral directors use data backup sites such as Dropbox? So the answer to that is yes, you can, as long as you know that they're secure. So your likes of Dropbox is going to be secure. And if you go into their privacy policy and security policies, they will allude to that. And if you contact them, they will give you any information that you need in relation to that. Just seeing something coming up here. We'll just come back to it. Yep.
So the last time we were asked who's responsible when applications are sent from a funeral director to Golden Charter via Royal Mail. This was addressed by the DMA in a webinar that they did as well. Certainly our position, it's the funeral director's responsibility to ensure documents are secure and that they're sent to the correct address. So kind of reasonable expectation that you check where you're posting it before you put it in the post. It's also advisable that you ask for proof of postage from Royal Mail, because that would then kind of suggest that the obligation lies with Royal Mail in that instance. So if you've sent it recorded delivery or special delivery, it's clear that Royal Mail have received it, it would be up to them to investigate the loss. And likewise, once we can show it's arrived in the office here, the obligation would lie with us. So I think all we're really looking at in terms of that is to make sure everyone's kind of doing their due diligence along the way. You know, use your common sense, make sure you're checking things before you're sending it. And likewise, we've put processes in place this end to make sure we're logging things as they come in so we don't lose them our end either. The next one, are Golden Charter taking a risk-averse approach and over-interpreting the GDPR? This is something we've heard quite a bit across the board. And I think the answer is just given the size of the business and given that we do handle sensitive data insofar as we do process religion and we do store that for most of our customers, we do have to take quite a strong approach to interpreting it. So our approach may well be different than if we were, you know, yourselves running a small run funeral business with a few employees. But given the size of the business and the nature of the data that we process in our day-to-days, we do make sure we do take quite a risk-based approach to that, and we've sought advice from the regulators, from the trade bodies, and from our own legal experts, and you know, we've gone with our risk appetite on the basis of that information. And it is worth saying, we're not telling you what to do. Although we'll give you guidance, it is your business at the end of the day, and we can only provide you with what we think and what we interpret. At the end of the day, you know, it's your business. You need to decide what's risky enough for you to accept and what's too risky for you to want to do. Except for funeral plans, because then we're going to tell you what to do. Where should funeral directors store Golden Charter funeral plans? Again, as we kind of said before, we'd be looking for them to be kept securely. So locked drawer, filing cabinet, anything like that. Really, we just want you to take a common sense approach to it and not leave it lying about on desks or anything where you might not be there. We're not suggesting you do, but we just need to give the extreme scenarios just, you know, food for thought. And again, you want to make sure that you're checking who has access to these areas as well. So whilst back offices probably reasonable for it to be kept, we wouldn't be expecting customer data to be in kind of the front office where Joe Public could come in and look at it. Will funeral directors be able to submit application forms to Golden Charter online? So as you may or may not know, there is a pilot running just now with a handful of funeral directors where applications are submitted electronically through an app and payments are taken either over the telephone or through chip and PIN. It's early stages in the pilot, but the initial feedback is positive, and we'd hope that we'd be able to give you, or the pilot team would be able to give you a bit of an update, in the future with regard to how that's going. If it's something that you're interested in knowing a bit more about, you can contact your local Golden Charter rep and they'll be able to give you a bit more information on that. And the last one, how will funeral directors know how they should handle Golden Charter documents and data? Again, as we've kind of said, we'll send you out the things that we expect you to do. So either us or your local rep will send you out processes, levels of standard that we expect you to adhere to. You should also follow the guidelines within the Golden Charter Essential Guidance and Support Pack. Nice catchy name for you to remember. You should have all received those kind of in the last 6 months or so from your representative, and anything in there we'd expect you to be adhering to, and we'll also update them as required as well. Louise and I have both been working a lot to create you some awareness posters, some guidance and some templates which will help you both with your prepaid planning and your Golden Charter plans, but also just implementing the GDPR generally in your business. And we'd hope to have them available on your Golden Charter portal towards the end of this month.
I've just been quickly trying to jot down a couple of the last questions there, so apologies if I've not caught them. I'm terrified to maximise the chat box in case I cut you all off, so I'm going to do my best here. So Michael asked about template availability. So what I've got here is actually a list of everything that we plan to give you. So we've got marketing consent guidance and an example template. So we have wording specific for funeral directors to use. All you need to do is make sure you put your own funeral director name in. Consent for processing guidance, privacy policy guidance and a privacy policy template, document retention policy guidance alongside a template to use, which forms almost like a checkbox to give you a good grasp of what you need to do in your own business. Data security and customer rights. There will be an update to the Golden Charter guidance pack, so the guidelines, as Kira just suggested, a contract between ourselves, but also a contract that you can use with any third parties and the due diligence documents that go with that, and an infographic poster that you can use with your team members, funeral arrangers, that they can keep up in the back office that has some Q&A on it for them as well, without them having to read 64 pages of a funeral director guideline. So like Kira said, we were hoping to get that out the end of this month. We were hoping to get it out sooner. However, upon review, we decided that it did need to be simplified. That was also an output from me going to a funeral director and me having conversations with more funeral directors and really understanding the needs that you guys have. Kira and I speak about compliance all day, every day. I live and breathe it. GDPR is my life just now, and I get that you have got whole businesses you have to run, so we need to make sure this is as friendly for you guys as we can possibly make it. Another couple of the questions that came up there is, so somebody asked if we meant that the next of kin will no longer need to tell us the next of kin details. That's not what I meant at all. So please don't not put that on your prepaid funeral plan application forms. What we meant by that is after you have fulfilled the funeral plan and you want to store the application forms, so some of you might be quite happy to shred the application forms once the funeral plan's done. And you'd have the money and you might have your own data retention, but for those that want to keep the application forms, you need to redact the next of kin details at that date. Golden Charter will hold them in line with our own retention policy, but we will also get rid of any data that we no longer require. Consent for celebrant to contact a customer. So somebody asked if the celebrant wants to contact the next of kin a month after the service to find out how it was. Should the celebrant have consent for that? Yes, they should, and that is up to them to make sure they get that consent. So at the point of arranging the service, they should be asking them. There was also a question about keeping records for HMRC. So I think I alluded to this previously, but it's about what you need to keep. You probably don't need to keep whole application forms with next of kin detail, full next of kin details on it. I'm not a tax expert, so if you can get away with having an invoice with just a reference number on it, with no need for the next of kin details, you shouldn't need to have that. HMRC will also be considering GDPR and the requirement that they have to hold data and what they're expecting businesses to do. But it is about just making sure that you're keeping the minimum required. Somebody also asked if it was possible to have an annual contract with celebrants. If that's something that you want to do and you deal with a small amount of celebrants and you want to make sure that your customers are fully protected and that you understand what they're doing with the data, that is 100% up to you to do that, and you can do that annually. Again, it's your business, so we're giving you the DMA guidance and you might want to go that one step further, because just because that's the guidance we're receiving now doesn't mean that in a year's time they might change their minds. So the next slide, we've got Golden Charter support. So we've already covered most of these questions, the likes of, can I still conduct a leaflet drop? Yes, you can. You can continue doing your radio adverts, leaflet drops, newspaper inserts, anything that's not directed to Mrs. A. Smith, you can continue to do that sort of advertising because you're not directing it at an individual. So when it's mass like that, you definitely can continue any sort of advertising like that. When can I capture consent? That's entirely up to you. We as a business tend to do it the first time we speak to customers, or once we're getting customers to sign up to a plan. And again, our contact centre use very strict wording, not dissimilar to that we're given to the funeral directors as a template, but we ask that we make sure the customer knows we're going to be calling them back on that first time, that first contact, if we don't have the opportunity to have the full conversation. But as a minimum, at the point of application and customer agreeing to a prepaid funeral plan, we will go through full market and preferences with them. What can I contact customers about? You can contact customers about anything that you have consent to contact them about. Now, what we don't want is the application forms become 20 pages long and 15 of that is consent documents. So it's about making sure that consent is specific and users are happy with what it is that the customer understands. Therefore, you might want to say that the customer consents to events, which may include bereavement services, open days, memorial days. And as Kira was alluding to, it is your business. The GDPR is specific, and it does say if you want specific, and that would mean you would need a consent for bereavement services, a consent for memorial day, memorial services, open days, prepaid funeral plans, stonemasonry, jewellery. That's 6 consents just there. So it's about standing back and saying, what risk am I willing to take? Have I had any complaints about this previously? And documenting why you've made the decision that you've made. I think that's us. I'm just having a quick check to make sure that I've not missed any of the questions. So I'm just reading this one. So if the next of kin is expecting you to hold details because you've got an ongoing relationship with them, that becomes a different contract. So in terms of Golden Charter, we obviously have a contract with the customer up to the point of funeral fulfillment. If you have a contract with the customer to fulfill stonemasonry, that's then a different contract that you have, unless it's been done in an IW plan. If the next of kin expects you to have that details, you may want to keep them. One of the conversations I was having with the funeral director yesterday was about date of retention starts at the point that the contract is fulfilled. So that's not saying you can't keep next of kin details for the periods of a prepaid funeral plan because that customer's been alive for 30 years after having taken the prepaid funeral plan out. That means that after that customer passes away and you fulfil the funeral, the retention period starts then. So if you decide as a company that actually we need to keep the details for 5 years afterwards to fulfil 7 years HMRC purposes, we often get queries from next of kin. In that case, you might want to keep them. However, if it's a one-off, and I understand that a one-off irate customer can be time consuming, can be upsetting for the customer, can be upsetting for your staff, but we do have DPA obligations that we have to fulfill, and whilst customers don't want to hear that, and generally they don't, we do have a legal obligation as well. So it's about taking your risk background, but with prepaid funeral plans, we will be advising that next of kin details after fulfilment, once you've had your bill paid, are no longer required. So I think that's all for today. Oh, I can suddenly see an influx of people answering questions, so I'm going to try and maximise this chat. So I'm just going to have a look, 1 second. See if there's any that require us to touch on them again. So the yearly cost to register is £35, sorry, and that is annually. Yeah, I appear to have lost the chat box. I'm so sorry. I knew this was going to happen. So we'll just leave it there. Angela and Claire at SAFE will very kindly send me over any of the questions, and we'll just make sure that we get that over to you as quickly as possible. The FAQs that we have available now, we will be able to hand over to SAFE to put onto their website alongside the link for the webinar, and there will be more information coming from Golden Charter, like we said, hopefully towards the end of the month. So thank you, everybody. Bye.